I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's the budget workshop meeting, number 1. Calling the meeting to order at 7 o'clock. Okay? Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? It's to your right, my left. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, moving on the agenda down to item number 5, which is going to be the presentation of the Bob Figueroa All-American Honoree Award. And Mr. Schaefer is going to come up and make a little speech about the award and its meaning and present it to the Board of Education.
I'd like to thank the board for this opportunity to say a few words about this plaque that's being donated to the Patchogue-Medford School District. This was the brainchild of a gentleman who graduated in 1969. And it was his thought that he could do something for the district in the honor of one Robert Figueroa, Bobby, who graduated in 1968 with me as well. Bobby was a track star. He ran track like there was no tomorrow. He would just run for the sake of it, always in fast motion. Playing football as well, he was a vital card to our 1967 co-championship team. I would hand the ball off to him, and that's it. I'd see the back, number 22, and rear end running down the field. In fact, I think he still owns the record for the longest run in Patchogue-Medford history of 95 yards in the line of scrimmage. And we often teased him, stating that he could probably run through the car wash and not get wet. However, going back 50 many years, who had $2 for Robo at the car wash? We were out buying beer or a couple burgers or whatever. But Bobby, he set a lot of records here at Patchogue-Medford. He anchored several relay teams. He ran track like there was no tomorrow. When he graduated from Patchogue in '68, he went on to CW Post, held many records there as well. Relay, individual races, and excuse the pun, but he ran around the country. He went to different meets, California, New York, Northeast states, so forth and so on, and just a tremendous ball player. And like the rest of us, 17, 18 years old, he was a fun-loving guy, enjoyed fooling around, a little crazy, but when it came to track, he was right there. This plaque was put together by Bruce Meltzer, class of '69, and it's named in the honor of Bobby Figueroa. Bobby passed away in 2011, so he has no idea, of course, what's going on here now tonight. But Bruce did the research. He made numerous phone calls to managers, coaches, administrators, athletic directors, fellow teammates throughout history, and put together this plaque. It's named in honor of Bobby Figueroa, but there are 13 other people on this plaque as well. We have wrestlers, a lacrosse player, even a bowler, a couple young ladies on the track, on the plaque itself, track and field, cross country, baseball, you've probably heard of Marcus Stroman, and so forth and so on. So it's quite the honor, and I'm here tonight on behalf of Bruce Meltzer, who did all the research, like I said, funded it himself with any outside material or clubs to help him out. But so it's a great honor to be here on behalf of Bruce to give this to the Patchogue-Medford School District. Thank you. Is Anthony here?
Thank you again, Mr. Schaefer. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 6 on our agenda, and that will be the budget workshop. And that will be presented by Mr. Mazie and his team.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much to the board for this opportunity to present this budget workshop. Number one, thank you to the community for joining us. And on this, what I'm going to do is explain a little bit about the process. We do that each and every year at this time to share what the budget development process is like, because this district does it very different than other districts. And I say it every year, but it's always worth mentioning why it's so important. This district does not develop a budget in a silo. It does not do it in a singular office. It's not done behind closed doors. It's a very collaborative process. And I share that every year because the people you see here at the dais and the people you see over here in the audience is my operational team, which every year I forget to or neglect to acknowledge them for their hard work in putting this together, because it takes great minds to put this together. And you're going to hear me say this throughout the budget development process, because these meetings that are taking place, these conversations are meaningful. So with us this evening, we have Mr. Rich Roth in charge of technology. We have Mr. Irwin in charge of food services, Mr. Ahern in charge of security, Mr. Toops in charge of transportation, Mr. Noonan in charge of plant facilities, Ms. Simonello in charge of the print shop, and all the other areas that I need help with. That has to be said. And Ms. Lamb as well. But this is the group that's put together this first particular one. Now, we break this up into several workshops because, as you can see on the board, we have a very large budget. We've got a lot of areas, a lot of information to talk about. So it's broken up over several dates. You'll see them on the screen there. This first one is going to go over central administration areas and operational areas. So we'll go over the general support areas that I just mentioned, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the governor's budget, which was just released last week, which is a large source of revenue for us. February 27th is the real meat and potatoes of our budget, because that covers our curriculum areas in general education and special education. Also will include look at the BOCES budgets, and also we'll show you or we'll share with you the property tax calculation that we've come up with for this particular budget, and then report to the state the following day. March 19th, we'll go through all the staffing, benefits, interfund transfers, community schools, etc. That's the culmination, and then we'll present this in its totality at that point for the board's consideration, and then hopeful adoption at the March 24th meeting. And then, as a reminder, the budget hearing is on May 8th this year, and that is a culmination of everything we've talked about through the process, and will be a refresher for the community prior to the vote, which I believe is the 20th. So we start with what some of the objectives are for the budget in terms of development. And you're going to see on the screen a lot of mention of the word continue, because one of the things that we've done, I think, particularly well, and we shared this with the community and the board for the last few years, and that's one thing in particular. We saw like a large influx of monies from COVID. And I share that because it was important at the time for us to tell you we've got nearly $20 million in COVID monies. How are we going to put that to good use and then continue those things that we introduced into this district and into this budget? And that's what we did. As soon as we got those monies, we worked toward keeping them in and keeping these programs in place for these students. So when you see the word continue up there, that's us staying the path, saying we know that we still need to utilize the data to make sure that we're helping the students make the advancements that they need in their learning. We need to increase community engagement and stakeholders and all the different inputs that we have throughout the year. We want to continue the support of SEL, which is social, emotional, and mental health supports for our students. We want to explore options to determine if Summer Academy is going to be offered at the same level that we've offered in the past, which was completely funded by COVID, or do we offer it in some kind of modified form? That's a big number for us this year, because like I said, it was completely funded in previous years by COVID. We're going to continue implementing actions toward closing the achievement gap for our English language learners and our special education students and students with disabilities. We're going to look to enhance curriculum resources that are always in line with our New York State learning standards. We're going to continue to increase our cultural competencies district-wide in order to better reach the needs of all students. And a major focus that you're going to hear throughout this is sustaining the things that we put in place. Because introducing something and then pulling it back a year or 2 or 3 later is not helping anybody. So us continuing by virtue of us just doing that is staying the course and doing what we need, what's proven to be a successful formula for our students. And that's a major initiative of this particular budget, as it has been in previous budgets. So a lot of this you'll see examples of this as we go throughout this presentation. But some of the factors to consider. So we always look at this kind of, from the internal and the external factors that really can have an effect on the budget. And this is just some of them. But on the internal side, we've got pending contract negotiations with undetermined outcomes. Those need to be considered as we go through this, because when we're putting this together, we've got to guesstimate what we think the best things are, what's going to happen here, what's going to take place, how is this going to impact the various lines in our budget. And that's happening across the district with several bargaining units. We want to continue, there's that word again, continue the supports that we put in place for our one-to-one initiative for our students with electronic devices to make sure that they are never without their instructional aids. We're going to continue to expand our CTE program, our career and technical education. That has been extremely successful over the past few years. And we're looking, it's still growing. Largely driven now by student desire to want to participate in these programs. We've got a retirements of our existing staff. That's always a big factor in any budget. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, the sustainability of these newly introduced programs is keeping those in place and not pulling back. And I share this with you because you look at things in a microcosm. If you're looking at what's taking place here in our district, you don't have necessarily the basis of comparison. So if you do yourself a favor and just read Newsday or see what other districts are doing, you'll see lots of differences. You'll see districts reporting how they're pulling back on things, no longer offering services that were once in place. Accessing of staff is a huge one, meaning they don't have the affordability. So when we talk about things like being fiscally prudent and financially sound, those words and those terms sound wonderful, but having the ability to back them, the way you measure a district is through their actions. And those are some of the more significant actions I can share with you that we do very well here that may fly under the radar. But you'll see, and I know because I've heard from my colleagues in other districts already, they know that they can't do it without pulling back and letting go of staff. And that's a big one. You're talking about people's livelihoods. And then your supports to your students thereby change as well. Now, on the external side, there's a million things happening. Take a look at your news feed today, and you'll see 2 or 3 in particular. There's a lot of unpredictability with what the new administration is going to bring. We don't know what those are going to be. But what we do know is some of the things that we've seen here already is our insurance companies across the board are showing us there are going to be significant increases in our premiums. And we'll talk about that more in subsequent slides. But we're looking at increases to the tune of double digits, like 15 to 30%. When I say significant, numbers that we're going to have to be very strategic in order to be able to sustain these things, to be able to keep these things in line with our budget. We've got tax cap implications. As you know, the tax cap is a formula that the state has, and like I said, we'll discuss that more in detail the second budget workshop. But we're held to the lesser of 2% growth or CPI. The CPI is a consumer price index, which is currently at 2.95. But we're going to be held to the lesser of those. So we're going to be held to 2%. But I just told you that insurances alone are going up double digits. So Darren, you see the challenges. Our tax-based growth factor is barely over 1%. It's 1.0007. That's such a benign number that's not even worth mentioning. Our rising health insurance rates, once again, double digits, 10 to 25%. They've been increasing over the last 3 years alone. Our retirement contributions in our employees' retirement system and our teachers' retirement system, which largely comprises all of our employees. We've been dealing with those. The last number that they were telling us was probably going to be around 10%, but we didn't have it in time with this presentation. And then there was the Rockefeller Institute. They commissioned a study to be performed to specifically examine foundation aid and how and if it should be changed. And even though that report just came out, the effects are not fully there yet. Although there's one that's being implemented, it looks like, in the governor's proposal, we have yet to see those full effects on our budget. But there's more to come with that for sure. So speaking about the governor's budget, I mentioned it was released last week. I don't know why the bullets are loading slowly. I'm not sure why. But basically, they talked about total school aid in education will be $37.365 billion. That constitutes an increase of about $1.7 billion, or roughly 4.7%. And that's across the state. For us, what does this mean? We got a nominal increase. We got an increase that, when it nets out, because aid is broken down into multiple categories, basically we're looking at about a $221,000 increase. And just for comparison purposes, we were looking at $600,000 last year. So a marked decrease. So you're almost, in layman's terms, looking at almost what would be a flat budget in terms of our revenue support from the state aid side. And then once again, just to caution everyone, this is the governor's proposal. The legislation still has to weigh in. We typically, they have to have that to us by April 1st, but we're working with what we know at this point in time. Now, there were three big things mentioned in the governor's proposal. The first includes about $340 million toward the funding of what's called universal free school meals. We're going to talk about this a little bit later when we get to this, because Mr. Irwin is here. I mentioned in charge of our food services, and that's not part of the budget areas that we're covering tonight. That's a separate fund. You're going to see the implications. So I'm going to come back to this point later, but that's something that already everyone in our school district qualifies for: free meals, breakfast and lunch. The other two big proposals were one called the College and High School Opportunity Fund. It's about $64.5 million for related programs. It's there to provide support for economically disadvantaged students to achieve college credits. And it will be for participating students in qualified programs. That's a big piece of the budget proposal. The last one is about $13.5 million to aid in the implementation of what they're calling distraction-free school policies. And what it is to reduce the use of smartphones in school or other internet-aided devices. There's been a lot of talk about this amongst lots of districts because we're finding it more and more difficult with all students having these devices. So they're looking to put monies toward that to aid in policy creation and potentially plans to aid with assistance we've yet to see. So now we're going to dive into the different budget areas. That just kind of sets a stage, but now we're going to dive into the different areas that I told you about at the onset. And these start with the central administration. So for those of you that are seeing this for the first time, or just as a reminder, there's lots of budget codes here, lots of numbers on the screen. This is going to be available for you online as soon as tomorrow, so you can see it, because it's impossible to go through all the data. But we always provide the 3 years worth of data. We give you the budgeted numbers, we give you the actual expense numbers, and we give you a projection of where we think this year is going to be, as well as what we're proposing for the 25-26 school year. I always take an opportunity to highlight different lines for you. I try to call attention to things where we see a significant dollar or percentage increase or something notable that might be taking place that I think is worthwhile for your knowledge. So on this line, on these areas, you're going to see at the bottom, when you look at the total, we're looking about $4,300 for the increase across all of these budget lines. So when I call your attention back to the top, you see an proposed increase of just under $3,000 or 17%. That's for the travel and conference line. And we've been noticing that in past years as we have these expenses with these conferences. Depending upon where it is that holds the conference, can affect these expenses. Once again, it's going to be in New York City. We're cognizant of that, and that's why we're proposing a significant increase on this line. But even $3,000 constitutes only 5.66% in totality when we look at all of these different areas that include the Board of Education, district clerk, the district meeting, which is the voting, and the superintendent's codes. Moving on now to the business office codes that include auditing, treasurer, our legal, and our insurances that I mentioned earlier. This is one of two slides. The one that I've highlighted for you is on our contract services line. We had a major changeover in our payroll department with 2 retirees, 2 out of 3 people in our payroll department, both retired this year. So we're going to send them out for training. They're going to have to make up for about 40 some odd years of experience, give or take. So we've got an outside agency that we contract with. So as part of that, we're looking to send them for that particular training to make sure they're up to speed so that they adequately handle all the payroll claims that come in, which total in the several hundreds each and every payroll. That's what you see on that line that's highlighted there for the $4,900 increase. Moving ahead to the second slide. We have on our legal services line our additional legal services. And what we've been doing is looking at our 3-year average. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Please hold. Technical difficulties, is it not there? Well, this is the part where you have to take my word for it. I'm going to read to you from my script here. There's a slide evidently missing. I'm not sure why. But there is a second slide for the finance area, and it includes our codes for the legal, insurances, memberships, judgments, and claims. And what I've highlighted is we looked at our additional legal services. And the more that we need to support that, we're watching actual things that are coming in. So we look at averages, and we're proposing an increase on that line about 8% in accordance with what we've seen. The one I really wanted you to see was the ones on the insurances for our student accident, our multi-peril, our cyber insurance, our umbrella insurance, our school board legal liabilities, and our vehicles. Because the lowest of those numbers is a 5.5% increase. The highest one is about a 32% increase. Those are the numbers that I mentioned earlier in the slide. We're talking to the tune of $293,000 in that one area alone. So when you look at these business office codes in totality, we're looking at about 16% increase, which should be on the subsequent slide. The summary slide at the end. And I'll make sure it's in the presentation. It gets posted online. Like I said, I'm not sure why it's not here. But that 16% roughly is $340,000 across all of those budget codes. So now we move to the human resources slide. And I can only assume that Dr. Cohen was the one messing with my presentation because he wanted everyone to focus. He wanted everyone to focus on his slide. Oh my gosh, he's only up 2.93%. Yes, folks, that's less than 3%. He is the winner so far, but this is early in the presentation, so much to go. But no, Dr. Cohen did a wonderful job. Last year, we talked about the big increase to bring in that scanning system. That's been removed from the budget. There are some incidental costs on there. Like I said, I highlight them just so you can see, but to the tune of $1,300. Modest increase is expected for employee evaluation, absence management, and the electronic personal file programs. But really nothing notable to speak of here on this line. Well done, Dr. Cohen. Now we talk about the child care budget, and each and every year, this is a zero, and I share it with the community because this is our expenses for our before care and after care program, and our summer care and our summer recreational program. And this is supported by the revenues that come in for the programs, as well as monies that we get back from CACFP, which is Child and Adult Care Food Program. So because they are offset by that, we just show you what we think are estimates for the programs, for the program based on the actual numbers of attendees. Like I said, but no budget impact there to be concerned. Now, moving on to Mr. Noonan's area, plant facilities. This is, and I hope this is slide 1 of 2. Let me just see if you can see. Yeah, it's there. Okay. So the first area is the 1620 codes. These are for the custodial areas. And you're going to notice in summation that he's got just a 1.21%. I think that's less than Dr. Cohen's 2.36, but I'll have to check my numbers later. But he's got a few more dollars, yes. But we're looking at, potentially $30,000 as an increase proposed on the custodial supplies line. So once again, we're looking at this in terms of the history of what we've been needing. We're always dealing with market price increases. But as we increase our cleaning efforts and things like that, this is where we see the most significant need for this budget in terms of the increase. Subsequently, we have a line right underneath it, which is uniforms. And there is a clause in the full-time operational contract that is close to being ratified that would constitute the increase for more uniforms. So we want to make sure that this budget reflects that need and has that built into it as opposed to the other way around. So like I said, 41,000 on that particular line. We're going to add that to the number here, which is significantly higher for maintenance, which is about an $87,000 increase. And here you'll see some changes. Those first 2 lines I want to call your attention to. You'll see a $20,000 proposed increase, but no data to the left of it. That's a new code that we are creating. And this is where I talk about that collaboration. So Mr. Noonan got together with Mr. Krakow, Director of Athletics, say, if we need to put money specifically towards equipment for the purposes of athletics, why don't we do that? And we set it aside and we broke it out. So he took $15,000. You see the line underneath it under the athletic maintenance code, pulled it out of that budget to put it specifically towards equipment. So this could be scoreboards. This could be bleachers. And this is for new equipment purchases. But it's advantageous for us to have it because you cannot put money into an equipment code. You can do budget transfers among your other codes, and you can pull money out of an equipment code, but law dictates that you cannot put money into a code. So if you have money available at the end of the year, you can't just take money, put it into that for those purchases. So it's really advantageous for us to do it this way, specifically for those needs. But it wasn't just $20,000 of new monies. I wanted to show that we were taking from another area specifically for that intent. On the maintenance supplies, we're looking at increases in this line because we're seeing more and more and more of our own maintenance staff doing in-house repairs of various items. We've got master tradesmen in the areas of plumbing, electric, HVAC, carpentry. So instead of farming these things out to outside vendors, we're trying to pull more and more in-house, similar to what we've done with bringing students back from BOCES and doing things in-house, for instance, in our CT program I mentioned. So it's very advantageous to do that if you've got skilled staff that can perform these duties and the ability to, like I said, to do it yourself. So, like I said, overall, the increase is, as Dr. Cohen astutely pointed out, much higher in terms of dollars, about $128,000, but an increase percentage-wise of 2.26%. Well done, Mr. Noonan. Now moving on to security, and Mr. Ahern is overseeing this. So you might remember that I called your attention to some of the things that we're doing, those goals at the beginning, that continued focus on safety. One of the things he'd like to do is introduce a 3rd roving vehicle to our district. Right now we currently have 2, but we've got a big district and we've got 12 buildings, counting district office. So the addition of a 3rd gives us the ability to respond to crises on a faster basis. So that's where the proposed increase, that's largely what that $15,000 is for that you see on the first line for equipment. The other line that I wanted to call your attention to is a $31,000 increase, which is really the majority of the increase on this code. That's on our contractual services. And I mentioned to you earlier about some of those COVID monies. We used a large part of those COVID monies to bring in security and safety enhancements. One of them was to bring in additional cameras into our buildings throughout the district to the tune of about 200 cameras installed in our buildings district-wide. They all come with licenses that are required with our contracting agency. That's where you see that large number. That's why you see that jump in it. Now that those cameras have now all been purchased with COVID monies, we need now to pick up the recurring costs that you're going to see year after year. Overall, we're looking at just under a $50,000 increase in the security budget area, an increase of about 32%. Now, Ms. Simonello, this is the print shop area that I mentioned earlier. A couple of things that we want to call your attention to. Bless you. The first is a decrease on the commercial printing side, because one of the things that she has been working on is the ability to have our in-house printers print our envelopes and receipt books. So what that means is by doing stuff in-house, once again, here's another great example, dropping that line $5,000 as a result by doing things in-house. On the equipment rental side, though, you will see a $14,000 increase. We brought 3 new copiers into our machines. And if you tie this into some of the things that we've talked about in subsequent years, where we increase staffing by over 100 people, this is one of those supports you want to put in place to make sure that everyone's needs are being met. And what we decided is that we would need 3 copiers to do that for next year. There's the increase that's associated with that. Overall, though, we're talking about, what was the number? I neglected to go with the summation. It was a 3.34% increase of just under $15,000 across the budget area. Well done, Ms. Simonello. Now, technology. This is one of 2 slides. And this is one that we've had a lot of talk about over the past few years, because there was a lot of money coming in with COVID that we put towards our technology. Those costs we're now been slowly bringing back, and we're doing a lot of in-house examination. One of the things that's very important to remind everyone is the continuation, that the children don't suffer, that we're continuing to make sure that they have their electronic devices that they need. So if the monies do evaporate on the COVID side, that we're not just pulling those back. So we are working, Mr. Richroth and I, with Ms. Canetti on the instructional side to make sure that they have what they need, whether they're in school or if we need to go to remote learning, that we're always adequately prepared. But you start up, and Mr. Richroth really wanted me to highlight this first line. I can't imagine why. It's a $211,000 decrease because he was able to complete the switch project that we had done with E-rate just last year. That was the big increase that we proposed at the time. You'll notice that that's no longer necessary in this budget, and that's why we're going to direct more of our monies, as you'll see subsequently, to the devices. On the data processing software, though, the number of iPads that we brought in has increased, and there's a management program that's associated with the iPads. As that increases, the number of iPads increase, the number of licenses increases in accordance with that, and that's why you see that increase on that line of nearly $24,000 for that data processing software. And then on the audiovisual side, once again related to our ARP monies, one of the things that we did with our ARP funding was to upgrade the public address systems in every single building throughout the district. With that comes the necessary licenses as well, right? Because that's license-based also, I believe, Mr. Richroth, right? That's also license-based. Subscription-based, I apologize. There you go. But the costs that go with it, like I said, this is now the maintenance costs that go with it to support the system, not the cost of the equipment itself, which was paid for by those grant monies. That's what the $60,000 is for on that particular line for the contract services. This is the second slide I mentioned, but here's where you see the $325,000 increase, which is the most significant part of this budget. But once again, the most necessary to make sure that we are continuing with the life cycle replacement of our devices for our students, so that we have this done twice throughout their educational career, so that they will be, K through 6, and then again 7 through 12, that they'll have these devices in place. But that money that was not there last year now coming back into this budget because we utilized grant sources, we've used smart bond monies, things that did not have an effect on the general fund budget. Now we need to make sure that they're rolled into the budget for that purpose. But then when you go down, you'll see two lines highlighted, one on top of the other, one a $40,000 decrease and one a $40,000 increase, which is essentially a wash. But one of the things that Ms. Kennedy and Mr. Richorth and I sat down to do is to kind of examine the licenses that go with the software as well. All these different programs to determine the necessity of them and which ones should be are antiquated at this point and should be removed from the budget. This is an ongoing process. This is that collaborative process taking place as we speak. She's commissioned all the directors to examine the usage of them in the classroom and determine where the real needs are, so we can see if there's ways to even change this by the time the final budget is adopted. But in all, we're looking at an 8% increase across all the technology codes, just over $200,000. And now we end with transportation as the last budget area that we'll be talking about this evening. The first line is the $160,000 increase for the purchase of a bus. We talked about this last year. We always examine the age of our buses, the mileage readings on our buses, and the usage of our buses, because those are the big three that come into play when we talk about whether or not we need a new bus. Last year we talked about it, and you're going to hear us talk about this more, is they talked about the new electric bus mandate. And just to remind everyone, there are two important dates for this electric bus mandate. That any purchases of diesel buses or non-electric buses can only happen up to 2027. Your entire fleet must be fully electrified or non-alternative use buses by 2030. So Mr. Toops, Ms. Seminona, and myself have been working with some outside agencies to start that process in terms of what this could look like, because it's not just the purchase of the buses, it's also the infrastructure that's necessary to support them. Well, we've had some very good preliminary meetings with them in terms of getting some good support, identifying alternate funding sources. But what's still going to be necessary between now and then is to replace 2 of our buses in our fleet. We have a fleet of 9, and we have 2 that are pretty much near the end of their life and that will not make it. But between this year's budget and then next year's budget, we can replace those 2. That will time out almost perfectly with us getting through to the 2035 year, at which point in time we'll have the plan in place, and we'll have it in place before then as to what it would look like with the electric buses, which, if we were to start buying those now, you're talking about maybe 3 times the cost. So you see why it's advantageous for us to do this now as opposed to going with an electric bus that we can't even support in terms of charging at this point in time. The equipment repair, that goes hand in glove with what I'm talking about. As your fleet ages out, you need more and more repairs. We're estimating that we need maybe another $10,000 for the in-house repairs that we've been doing and the external repairs that we're performing that we can't be doing in-house. And lastly, our contract transportation line. In accordance with the contracts that we have, so we have our in-house buses, I mentioned, we have 9. We use 5 on any given day, maybe sometimes 6. But we contract out for our large buses with Montauk Bus, and we contract out with our small buses with Town Bus. The increase that's proposed here is in accordance with those multi-year contracts, and that's why you see that increase of nearly 10% on that line. Overall grand total, you're looking at about $978,000, an 11% increase. And this is that summation slide that I mentioned to you earlier. This gives you just a snapshot of everything that we've talked about this evening. The grand total of what we're talking about in totality for all these budget areas is just about $21.5 million for the budget, an increase of about $1.7 million, which constitutes an 8.67% increase. So you hear a lot of numbers, but sometimes it's very important to back out a little and see how this looks from about 30,000 feet up. And that's the number that I want you to see, because you're talking about a $241 million budget. So this would be approximately 9% of that budget. But I wanted to end quickly, and I thought the board would appreciate this. When we talk about the operational areas and the effects on budget, and some of the things that we have been talking about this evening is with the goals, with these objectives. What does that mean? Well, Mr. Irwin, Ms. Lamb, and myself sat down over the summer because you heard me mention earlier the Universal Free Meals Program. We talked a little bit about the community eligibility provision, which provides all of our students free lunch and free breakfast. We qualified for that last year, specifically last December, when they changed the parameters slightly and we were eligible. And since then, we've seen an increase in our sales and our reimbursable meals that comes back from the state and from the federal government. And that has helped us tremendously. Now, the food service program is a self-sustaining program. That's why that budget's not included here. But I bring it up because of its implications. Because if I take you back to just 2 years ago, there's a budget line where we were supporting the program because it didn't have the ability to keep up with the demands and the wear and tear on specifically like the equipment is where we were seeing it. And the desire to want to provide the best program possible for our students is in line with the equipment that you have and the tools you have to work with in your program. So there was a line in there called the interfund transfer to food services. As soon as this program CEP went in and we qualified, we removed that from the budget. And that was a great coup. What we didn't realize is how much it was going to swing in the other direction in our favor. By virtue of these free meals, and we've seen more students taking place, we had, they just put some quick numbers up there for you, about 2.2 million in our excess fund balance. And SED says that, well, you can carry up to 3 months of your expenses in this fund balance. And when what happens is when you exceeded that number, you have excess fund balance and you have to have a spending plan. And we share that with the board, how we're going to spend that down. And we did this 2 years ago, correct me, Irwin? I think it was 2022. We had to do this. And we prepared a plan of how we would do that, what upgrades we could introduce. They then changed it over the summer to say, no, you can carry up to 6 months, which would actually put us in the negative by almost 300,000. But instead of just holding on to those monies, the three of us sat down and said, what can we do to implement upgrades into this program that are going to have a significant effect? Because we had every reason to believe that this year is going to be better than last year by virtue of the program running 10 months as opposed to 6. And that's the kind of forward thinking that I think that's important to share with the district when you say these things have crossover effects. I highlighted on the left the superintendent's goals and just the things that tie in directly that I saw by virtue of having an improved food service program. I'm going to show you some of the ideas that we have in there, but if you humor me for a second, the governor in her State of the State said numerous studies have confirmed that providing universal free meals supports learning, boosts test scores, improves attendance and class behavior, reduces food insecurity, and promotes better mental and physical health. That ties into 5 of the goals, the very things that I talked about at the onset of this meeting. So if we can take the monies, put it back into the program and find ways to improve the outcome for our students, we think that's a winning formula. So let's see if we're right. We put together a 3-tiered action plan for these food service upgrades. Number 1, improving the meal offerings. Number 2, introducing new equipment to assist us in that regard. Number 3, by addressing staff concerns. These are the very things I talked to you about at the beginning. We talk about involving all of our stakeholders. That means students' voice. That means our employees' voice. That means the board's voice. The board challenged us about 3 or 4 years ago, said, how can we serve students faster? How can we improve the meals that we're serving to them? This is that plan in action. And I think it's worth mentioning to understand when you're talking about budgeting, things can't happen in the here and now. Today's great idea might not be enacted upon for a year or 2 or 5. But the important thing is to stay with it, to not forget about it. It can't be a one and done. So we heard that message and we sought ways to bring it to fruition. It's not easy, especially when you're working with a tax cap of 2%, like I mentioned. But finding these opportunities is what this is all about. And that's why we have I believe, such an important budget development process and why I'm so proud of how we work collaboratively as a district. So improving meal offerings. And Mr. Irwin has been diligently working at this. And I say working in the present tense because this is what he's done so far. He's introduced whole muscle chicken as opposed to the processed foods that we were getting. He's provided more fresh fruit and vegetable options. He's added halal meals and other international food choices for the students. And he transitioned to a white flour pizza crust. These improvements alone will be about $150,000. So as you see that number that I was talking, we're diving into it and using about $150,000 toward the advancement of that. The next thing is to bring in new equipment, to install a backup generator at the high school for our walk-in freezers and refrigerators, which is where we keep 80–90% of our food storage. Okay. If there was a power outage and those foods went down, we can declare that with our insurance company, but then what happens? You can see your premiums rise. By protecting the integrity of our food now, to making sure that we never have to worry about that, saves us on both fronts. The purchase of 2 new refrigerated delivery trucks. So we use 2 trucks to bring our meals that are prepared at the high school to our satellites, which is the other 10 buildings. Instead of doing that with regular trucks, now we have refrigerated trucks to bring to the 5 buildings each. He wants to replace all of the aluminum pots and pans district-wide at all the kitchens, because it's been shown that aluminum over time can leach into food. So by replacing with stainless steel, that's a significant upgrade to the quality of preparation of the foods. Those improvements would be about $340,000. And then tier 3, addressing some of the staff concerns. We know years back we proposed to the board to reduce some of the part-time staff in our buildings because there wasn't the applications that we were receiving on the employment side, and we had seen sales going down. The numbers weren't there. Well, we're, just like I mentioned, just because of the advent of CEP, we're seeing an exact opposite reaction to that. We need to be able to, an exact cause, we're now reacting to that. And luckily, we're able to do it quickly. So we're proposing bringing an additional part-timer to all of the buildings to help with the additional either preparation of foods and or the serving of foods to expedite the meal service times that I mentioned earlier. We're looking to purchase new oil-resistant padded floor mats for the staff to help reduce leg pains that they may encounter throughout the day, since they are typically on their feet their entire shifts, and also minimize accidents that may come about as a result of spills, and then you have slips and falls as a result. And then, we talked about bringing cooling units to our classrooms and to our offices, to our gymnasiums, and to our cafeterias. But that doesn't apply to the kitchens, unfortunately, where the food prep is done, where the ovens are. It's not something that's necessarily feasible, not on the grand scale that it would take for us to do for the community, but we're looking to bring in more and more fans and have those purchased by Mr. Irwin through this program, and then installed by our in-house technicians, as I mentioned before, by Mr. Noonan's crew, to the tune of approximately $172,000. So of that, $900,000 number that I gave you, we've already got a spending plan of about $665,000, and this is to be continued. We're going to continue to watch the numbers to see if they're going to continue to escalate like we've been experiencing rather. And this slide is some evidence to that. We're also going to see, like I said, what the effect will be now that we've run the program for a full 10 months. So this is the last slide. I just pulled 3 items that he shared with me. And if you look at the sales for a comparable period of September of 23 to January 24 versus the same point in time for this year, September through January, look at some of the changes in some of these items. So chicken nugget sales, we did about 16,500 portions. We're up to about 16,800. The chicken patties, which is, Mr. Irwin, is that the one they refer to as the Chick-fil-A? The kids refer to as Chick-fil-A. If they tell you they're eating Chick-fil-A, they're not eating Chick-fil-A, but this is what they assume it tastes like. They love it. And it's not just they love it. Look at the numbers. 20,000 portions versus 25,000 portions in the same period of time. That's impressive. And then if you look at the pizza, by transitioning to the new pizzas, this is on the large 16-inch ones. This is at the high school only. The students at the elementary and middle still use the square ones, right? But the high school alone, the portions went from 22,000 to 40,000. Significant increases. The students are advocating by virtue of showing it with their purchases, and they're doing these purchases, as I mentioned, free of charge. So it's really good to see. And this is just through the first 5 months. As the word continues to go out there, we're hopeful to see even more and more results. So we'll report back out this to the board again throughout the year, probably at the end of the year, I'm imagining, and certainly at this time next year, which I hope to share even more impressive numbers. All right, in summation, the next budget workshop, as I mentioned, is for February 27th. It will be at Saxton's Middle School Auditorium, 7 p.m. And I did cover the budget categories that we'll be discussing, which is all the instructional areas. And I'm happy at this time to take any questions. Yes. Yeah, we shared that information. I think we shared that out with the board already. Is not something that requires an approval. It's not part of the budget. So we are headlong into moving forward with those plans. Right, but right. Yes, and the staffing one will be on the February agenda for your approval, just to make sure. And then, like I said, then the posting will go out. And then, like I said, we've been fortunate that that's been on the uptick, that more and more people have been applying for our part-time food service positions. Actually, our part-time positions overall. So it's actually wonderful. Yeah. You talking about the vehicles? Because I can't answer that on the employee side. It's a HIPAA thing. But you can get them a cake. How old are the vehicles? Mr. Hand, do you know the age of the vehicles? Mhm. No, I think it's for credits. My understanding is it's for credits, not for exams. It may cover exam. Yeah. Mhm. Anyone else?
Wow. So Frank, again, starting from the end, so the overview, that increase was just for the budget codes you discussed tonight.
That's correct.
Obviously, it's not the overall, that would not be the total amount, that would be a nice number. So, one of the things I think maybe you could comment on is, where Patchogue-Medford is as far as financial health, as was reported by the state, because you know, we've had that run come out from the state, and certain districts are in, you know, bad financial position. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about, what we got back from the state, from the controller.
Yeah, there was the report was the fiscal integrity report that just came out 2 weeks ago, and once again we seem to perform very well in all of these reports that we get. And while they're not quite specific, really the ones we share with our finance committee and our audit committee are how we're performing to our budget. I think The best answer I can give is what I had said earlier. When we look at something like the proof's in the pudding. So when we got all those monies from COVID, how we performed with that and how we utilized those funds, and I shared the story with people of what took place. The first thing we said about doing was figuring out how to use those funds. And as soon as we knew how we wanted to use them, the very next day we said, how are we going to make sure that we keep that going? And I think that tells you everything you need to know about your planning, because we are not looking at this like we're looking at a very lean budget this year. We're looking at scaling back on things, keeping this close to the vest because we thought the supports might not be there from the state level. And we were right so far. You know, the legislature can come in and change things, who knows? But we always ought to be cognizant of that. And whenever we share that, you always want to plan on the conservative side in that regard. And we don't have these excessive needs out there. I mean, things that we're putting forth. The bond is another good example. We didn't propose something to the community that was going to be a huge impact on them. We looked and provided the strategy as to, hey, here's how debt service is falling off. Here's how we think we can bring new debt on. I think it's the approach of how we go about our budgeting is the same way we approach all these things, whether it be grants, whether it be bonds, any of these funding sources, and really try to utilize every one of them that's available to us. So whether it's, I mentioned a bunch this evening. I mentioned art, I mentioned COVID, I mentioned smart school, utilizing these to make sure that we have the things that we need to provide. And just how we ended with Mr. Irwin's, area, like that's great that that's happening in food service, but alleviating that pressure on the general fund budget, and maybe improving it in other areas, that's a win-win, right? Because if we're feeding our kids and that's helping on the social and emotional side, that's great, because that's one of the things that we're setting out to do. And we might be able to scale back in another area. So I think those are things, but we get, to Trustee Doffrey's point, we get these reports from OSC and orders all the time. And really, like I said, getting bulletin board material.
And, again, just for the community, we're going to ask some questions tonight, but don't think that's where it stops. So, it's hard to sometimes absorb all this in just the meeting and answer questions back. But I'll touch on a few of the first thoughts I had. And again, moving things around budget codes to the proper code is very important. So when you were talking about plants and facilities aspects for the athletic equipment,
Yep.
Increasing that amount, I felt like you said we're throwing money in that code for things that we're going to need. Are we going to get a list of what the estimate is on $20,000 of items?
So what I was saying is, you can't. we used to have all the money in the athletic maintenance code, the one that's right underneath it.
Yeah.
And you could never use that code. So if your bleachers were in need of replacement, not repair, but replacement, or a scoreboard, and those are just some examples that I provided, you couldn't actually make those purchases because they'd have to come out of an equipment code.
Right, I understand that.
Right.
But are there any planned equipment purchases?
Well, at this time, we don't know what we need.
Okay.
Right.
That's fair.
But right, in totalities, what I was trying to demonstrate is the numbers in totality will be roughly the same. Maybe like, if I'm being specific, it's a $5,000 increase on those two lines. But this is a new code that enables us the ability to make those purchases should we need them. Right. Otherwise, for instance, the money would be tied up in just the maintenance code.
Right. And again, we know it's a mistake if you don't do that, and then you get to that point, and now what are you doing? Now where that funds come from? Under the security, the question of adding the other rover. So we say, oh, it would be nice to. I don't say it would be nice. You don't really say it would be nice, but adding another rover. What's the data that shows? Like, what are the other two rovers running into? Mr. Mazie said, we can get to situations faster. Are there situations that we're not getting to? And we're like, oh, if we had another rover, we would have gotten to that situation. Right. So obviously, if you have an event going on, you have coverage at that event. I know the board's spoken quite a bit about making sure we have the right coverage at events. But I guess my question is, where does the rover come in? If you were to tell me that, well, we couldn't get to this situation, and then there was another situation in April we couldn't get to, and then another situation in October we couldn't get to, it would make sense that, oh, yeah, it sounds like we need another one. Here it just sounds like it would be good if we had, but you don't really have any reason to say that we actually need it.
Well, can I ask a question on that, John? So like the day that we had a threat at Saxton and then we had a threat at South Ocean and the other car at the same, basically within a half hour of each other. And then we have the other one at the high school because we have regular high school stuff. So I guess that's the first thing that came to my mind is if two things happen simultaneously,
Right. And that's what I'm looking for. I'm
or
looking
even
for
two
those
rovers that,
cases.
even if we had the two cars when we evacuated South Ocean and they all walked to Bay, that's a big distance to have a lot of kids walking from school to school to have the cars. That's just what came to my mind first.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, that's what I'm looking for. When, Mr. Mazie, team, when you have these increases, some of them are very significant, and you've given some, responses tonight, but, those are the things like just a line with an amount of money without a background to it. Mr. Irwin's information certainly had a lot of detail into, and also had results showing, hey, this is working, and this is what we want to do for our students. In the area of technology, see James smiling back there. I mean, that's a big increase on there. I think I'd like to see more information in detail into why we go from 6K to 66K. You don't have to give it to me now. You can, okay. And then okay, so last year it was only one system?
Yes, Medford. Right.
Okay. So, I guess my point will be we're not at the end. But when we get to the end, if you go, okay, we're under the tax cap and we need a simple majority budget to pass and everything in here is advantageous for our students and the safety of our students and all those things. I don't think, if we could start there, and I know you can't because you build this over the next several months as we get to that point. But I think those are the things where we may have to look at alternatives if we get to that point. Maybe we don't do all 6 of them in one shot. Maybe we spread those out as we go through.
I think that's a fair point, if I could jump on that.
Yeah.
For everybody here, the reason I mentioned, we do this over the course of 2 full months, but the budget development process takes place over the course of like 4.5 to 5 months for these very reasons. You're not doing this overnight. Things are going to happen and come along and down the pike that you're going to have to make adjustments. So a lot can change between now and when we ask the board to adopt. But that's the intent. That's why these are proposed numbers. We're working with estimates with what we have now. We've made changes, I think, almost every year from the first budget workshop to the last. We've always made changes because we've needed to, because as we see everything come into focus. So it's a great point.
Correct. And one of the things we said we wanted to do, as you can see from the schedule, is get into that early March timeframe and give the district a chance to put together the information they need to go out to the community. But it's hard because you get to the end and all of a sudden there's a big chunk and you're like, I don't know if we can go out with this. Now, we've been very lucky because we've not only been under the tax cap, but we've also come in with at or lower what the tax increases would be, which
Yes, on
is
the rate-
phenomenal.
On the rate, yes.
And I have to say that we, as a board, and all board members, I think will say this, when we go out and talk to other boards and they look at Patchogue-Medford, oh, you guys have an unbelievable finance group, and that is the truth. Was that? Oh, yeah, yeah, we talk, yeah, and they're accountants for so many other districts, and, I don't want to say what they say about Doreen Lamb, because it's like, you have Doreen Lamb? Oh my God, that's great. But, so, James, with the other, computer hardware aid, so you're saying that was contractual subscriptions or
No, that's, no, go ahead.
hardware aid? Yeah.
Correct.
Uh-huh. Okay. Right. And this is always the problem when we look at any grants that go away and we talk about
Correct.
sustainability,
Yes.
right? And, now what do we do? I mean, you have a few things on here where it's like, okay, this went away, we have to pay for it. Like
Yeah.
they even said with the cameras and the subscriptions to the cameras. It's almost like somebody gives you something, but then the next year you got to pay for the service for it.
Right. So we were lucky enough to not have to pay for the devices last year, as Mr. Richwell said, and I had said earlier. But the end result is then you see a large increase the subsequent year. Now, with any kind of luck, I would love if we can get funding for this each year, but assuming we don't, you'd see that line basically, stay flat because it's going to be roughly in that area, barring any kind of significant increases. And I probably just changed this. Sorry. It's like talking about snow.
Okay, so when we jump to transportation and the bus,
Yes.
and we've always gone through that issue of bringing on another bus, and
Mhm.
we've been fortunate in the past years to have, our elected officials actually, come in with some aid for that. I know I've said directly to some of our politicians, give me a bus, and they kind of look at me and laugh, but I'm like, no, I'm serious, go back and get us something, and so now we're in the dilemma of the electrification. And I know that when the board went up to, I think it was the Rochester trip, and we all walked around and looked at the electric buses and was like, oh, how much is this? Oh, this is $500,000 a bus, and that doesn't include the charging stations and everything else you need. Oh, and they want us to implement this in what period of time? It's like, this made no sense. And I know when Bernadette can back me up, talking with the politicians, they're not so happy about the implementation timeline as well. So Frank, with this one now, you're saying if we purchase a bus prior to 27,
27.
we can continue to run that bus?
That's
Or
correct.
do we hit a point where they go, no, that bus has to be taken out
We can run up to 2035.
to 35?
Yep.
Okay.
And at that point in time, anything thereafter has to be done as an electric bus.
And is that what we would consider kind of the life expectancy of the bus anyway?
Yep, exactly.
So what
That's
about
why
the other buses we have? Are they going to be, yeah,
They'll
are
be
they going
older,
to be
but
timing out? Are we going to need
we're
another
gonna-
bus in that period? We only
Well-
have till 27. What do you do?
right. We have the two right now that we're focusing on will be this year's budget and then next year's, which
Okay.
is good for that, meeting that mandate, assuming it doesn't change.
And
And
I know,
yes, to your point, we have the other ones in our fleet. But Mr. Tubes is examining the mileage that they're putting on. We can certainly buy an electric bus before then, and we hope somewhere in, I don't know, 2030, I'm gonna guess, we'd have a plan to bring one on board. But right now, we think that bringing on the two, I told you, we use 5 on a regular basis,
Mhm.
sometimes 6.
Mhm.
Having 2 new ones, that's what's gonna help us get to 2035.
yeah, because I mean, I agree. Putting in that infrastructure ourselves is going to be tough. And of course, it's tough on the bus companies with their contracts. I don't know if they're kind of hedging increases based on the fact that they're looking down the road and saying, we need to start to put money away because we're going to have to buy all these buses. And
Yeah.
that's a big chunk. I don't know what those contracts are going to look like after they, what's their return on investment with buying. How many buses do we have from Montauk? The big bus? 50?
Yeah.
They got to buy 50 buses for us at $500,000. I mean, it's $25 million that they're going to spend. That's a tough business. I mean, some of them are going to be going out of business, I think. And again, like I said, the tough part in this is not knowing, we're not at the end, so it's hard to say where do we end up. But I really appreciate you guys. Do a great job of looking at everything. Having been on the superintendent's finance committee way back, and go every single line of this budget, and how many printers are we buying, and all these crazy things, as Mrs. Kennedy laughs because she was asking for a printer one year and was like, oh, Mrs. Kennedy needs a printer, let's get everybody to get a printer. And it's not really that. It was really the fact that there are needs. So budgets are very often wish lists to some degree, and we have to make the decision where we can actually fit everything in.
Yeah, and that's another good point. That's one of the reasons why I highlight when you see the drops, because it's important to see what goes into this. If you saw all lines going up, that's not a budget. That's exactly what Trustee DiNapoli is saying. People just rolling things over, and is it more wants versus needs? And we make each budget manager go through the process of examining all their lines. There's justification that they have to provide, rationale, lots of conversations, lots of emails. We sit down as a cabinet and review it on a weekly basis starting in November. My team and I do it on a daily basis. We do it with admin council on a bi-monthly basis. It's extensive. So, but it's really worthwhile, because getting accurate data and standing before the community, you can do so because you know what's going on.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we're going to move on to item number 7 on the agenda, public questions and comments on the presentation. First, let me read. Ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for questions and comments regarding tonight's budget workshop. Each speaker is limited to 3 minutes, and please note that the sharing of minutes is not permitted. Mrs. DeLeva will be monitoring the time and will notify you when there are 30 seconds remaining on your time slot. This public comment session is an opportunity for community members to ask questions about the information presented this evening. We kindly ask that you remain courteous and respectful throughout your allotted time. We welcome your input and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. So anybody that wants to come to the podium to ask questions, this is your opportunity.
Do we need to make a motion to close
We
this
need a-
one out first?
Okay, we need a motion to enter executive session to discuss personnel and confer with legal counsel. Can I get a motion?
I'll second it.
Trustee Jennings and Trustee Smith. Thank you.
Where are we going?